So I talked to you before about the showing you the comparison of what was being done in France versus America on different type of doll development. Well, years went along in the 1880s into the 1890s, and so we start to see more American dolls coming to the fore, not major industries, but certainly successful industries, many of them by women, many of them by companies that produced other dolls. For example, in the front row, there's the black doll and the little white doll next to her with the ruffled bonnet and the rosy cheeks. And they were both made by the Babyland Rag, which was a division of Horseman, and they have hand-painted faces. So there was a lot of going on of, like, some of the bigger firms were kind of looking at these little doll makers and saying, can we pull them in? Can we pull their skills in and maybe use them and market them in a bigger way? The black doll is really interesting because it's one of 2 or 3 dolls that Nancy Smith owned that appeared in the 1997 Classic American Dolls postage stamp series done by the U.S. Post Office. And it was quite an honor to be chosen for that. So she has the various documents that go along showing how she was chosen for that. So a doll made back in the 1890s and then some 100 years later being chosen as Classic American Doll. Standing behind her with her little suspenders, with his suspenders, is the blonde-haired boy, and he is the Colombian Doll, made by Emma Smith and introduced at the Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893. And I have some folio that I want to show you with this doll, which is quite interesting. Again, Nancy Smith tried to save everything she could of original documents. That's why there's so many original manufacturers' catalogs in this collection as well, because she really was into research everything. And so we have that. And then this tells all about the Colombian Dolls, something about the Queen of Dolldom and their makers, and various newspapers that publish their extracts of praise of the dolls. It's very interesting. And also telling you the various price list for some of the dolls. And here is the photograph on the front showing some of the various dolls, and this is going along with the little boy. Colombian. There is another Colombian doll in the collection as well. Moving along, on the top and the back is the girl with a little purple printed pinafore, very nice with braids. She and the little one sitting next to her, and I'm doing this deliberately to show you how some things almost had close correlation. Those are 2 examples of the Alabama babies done by Ella Smith of Alabama, obviously. And I want to take this one out and hold it in my hand so you get an idea of scale. This is the most precious. I love this doll. In fact, I made her number 1 in the catalog because I think it is so precious. I want to turn it around so you can see how the painting is so perfectly done on the hair. It's just absolutely wonderful. And you can see the stitched cap at the style of how the doll was made, the stitched on ears that all of the Alabama baby has. But look at that expression. This little wistful child is so precious. And with the painted blue ankle boots. Ella Smith made them with the painted hair and with the wig, as you can see in the larger version up there. Again, another one of the women who started out making them as for entertainment or to give to a child, and then it turned into a small business which lasted for several decades. Wonderful dolls shipped all over the country. Next to her, dolls that look very similar to hers and also similar to the Martha Chases, we have the 2 dolls by Gert Rollinson, another Massachusetts doll maker. She made them also, as you can see. She made a painted hair version and a wig version, and those are quite rare to find. Very, very sturdy, very durable dolls. In the front is one of my favorite of the American cloth dolls. Standing right here in the front is this wonderful boy with oil-painted pressed features, beautifully painted hair, known as the Shepherd Baby, because he appeared at the J.B. Shepherd department store of Philadelphia. Little is known about his background. There is some hypothesis that he was chosen in an art competition at the Philadelphia Art Institute, and then became like you could almost call it the mascot doll of the J.B. Shepherd store in Philadelphia, about 1900. Beautiful, beautiful doll with wonderful oil-painted features whenever you find them. You can see when you look at all of these the various level of artistry that they will have. And if you decide you want to collect them, then your choice you have to kind of come into is, do I collect for charm? Do I collect for rarity? Do I collect for artistry? And you'll probably find yourself collecting them for all of those reasons, which is what Nancy Smith did. We move around a little bit, and in the front row, we have the taller lady in the blue gown. And this doll is considered almost the front runner of the little dolls sitting next to her. I made a little note so I make sure I get the name exactly right. She is attributed to the works of Emma Louise Chitty, who was a distant relative of Maggie and Bessie Fole, who made their Maggie Bessie dolls at a little later period, over a period of some time. Very, very distinctive and sought after dolls. These are the ones that Bradley Justice at our seminar has done such in-depth research on and will be talking to you about. And so this is a very, very good example of her. Her ears are one of the things that give her this very distinctive notion of being by that particular woman. Behind her, we have the dolls that I've already talked to you about, the Roxana Cole doll. Roxana Cole was absolutely a fascinating woman. She was born in the South, and during the Civil War, she wrote these long letters to everyone telling about what life was like and how they were suffering and what was happening. Sometime after that, for some reason, she and her husband moved to Colorado for 3 years. Then they came back and they lived in the South again, and that's when she started making her dolls. And you have them here from 3 different periods, this being the earlier period, and I love her apron. Oh, it's wonderful. And then shortly thereafter, with a little slightly dimensional effect of the nose, which you do not find in the later ones, which were made by other family members later on. And they have that same sweet look, but not that real folk art look that the others have. Making dolls for benefit reasons, for charity, was a big thing. And a lot of the church groups and women's benefit groups would gather together, and they would have a basic pattern they would work with. And then the group would all work on making dolls that they would sell, and the benefits would go for the charity they were sponsoring. And so we have here 2 examples of the wonderful Moravian dolls that were done. Very, very lovely. We have an example of the Presbyterian doll that was done, and these were all church groups that made them. The most famous, however, was the Beecher group of Oswego, New York. And we have some wonderful material, let me get rid of that, from the Oswego group with this wonderful large doll known as the Beecher doll. Now, important to know, everyone always says the Beecher doll, and they assume that Julia Beecher made the doll. No, Julia Beecher was the head of this church group that made them. And here is, with this group, we have this doll. We have some of the most wonderful documentation that goes with it. I mean, I would love to read you about some of the things it says, which is, one of them is really great. It says, let me see. The auntie said, they were talking about how it came about, and what would a child want for her 6th birthday. The auntie said to herself, nothing would suit this child better than a doll, extremely fat around the waist, very short in arms and legs, staring in moonlight in the face, and dressed in an infant's cap and robe. Well, I guess they kind of accomplished that. Sitting one day, mending a pair of unbleached hose, an inspiration came to Julia Beecher from some angel lover of missions. Why not tie up the top of this stocking into a head, cut the lower part into forked members, stuff the middle very large, put on fat arms made from the mate, turn up and stuff the ends into feet and toes, paint an expressionless face with very red cheeks, and top it all off with yellow worsted hair. And there you have the Beach doll described, and this little piece came with it. This was published in 1895, and they did a result of the funds that they had raised over the past 10 years. They had sold 950 dolls. They had received $1,500 and their expenses were $398.49. So they had made for profit, distributed between foreign and home missions and our beloved Elmira charities, $1,111.89. And then P.S. silk underwear, much wanted. So if you sent in your silk underwear, you'd get a discount on your doll. And with this doll also is a photograph of Julia Beecher, an actual vintage photograph. It's not an ad, a photograph holding the Beecher doll. Nancy Smith, thank you for saving all of these things. We have other wonderful dolls. There were the Tibbet sisters in Pittsburgh, and I love the Tibbet sisters. I had their actual street address when I cataloged. We had another one of these dolls about 6 months ago, and so I did a Google search, and the house that these two sisters lived in still exists in Pittsburgh. You can see it. But anyway, this doll is baby sister, right here. Very, very rare. I've only seen it one other time, and that's when we sold it about 20 years ago to Nancy. And it tells all of the information about baby sister in the original promotional advertising. And it's stockinette with stitched features. And then they also designed this wonderful little petekin that is there. I put this doll in because it's really important. It's an American Madame Alexander doll. And we move from all of these very small studio type of places into a cloth doll being made about the same time as baby sister in the 1920s, early 1930s, from Madame Alexander, a cloth doll from a doll woman who formed a company that turned into one of the most major doll companies in the world in the 20th century. So very interesting to have that lineage. As so many of the doll makers were women working in their small studio apartments, there were some large manufacturers that had moved into the subject of dolls. They were toy makers in other fields, and Shon Hut was the biggest example of this. We have an example, Nancy Smith collected some of the rare early examples of Shon Hut dolls, and we're showing 5 of them right here. All of them, well, 4 of them having the very rare carved hair, one being the mannequin man that appeared in various sport uniforms and clearly was used in display windows of sport manufacturers showing the products that they did. And here we have the baseball player. He even has his original bat, which is pretty remarkable. Then we have 3 of the early carved hair dolls from the early Graziano period wearing their original costumes and scuffed and well-loved and played with, but as you love to find them in their original state. And then, not scuffed and not well played with, but all original and absolutely wonderful is our blonde-haired girl, because she is just in absolutely pristine condition. She's a very rare model, and she's wearing her original costume, original wig, shoes, and with her Shon Hut label. Wonderful example of from the group of about 15 or 20 Shon Hut dolls in the Nancy Smith collection that are shown in the catalog and in the auction. About 1912, an article appeared in Good Housekeeping magazine that was called Insurgents in Toyland. And this was a really fascinating article. Now, they were talking about Kathy Cruz, and you're looking at a group of Kathy Cruz dolls right now. These were done by from the Kathy Cruz studios, and Nancy Smith tried to get examples of many, many of the early kind. You will see, for example, the boy with the blue romper suit on has the ball-jointed legs, and he was the early model when Kathy Cruz was trying to coordinate with Cameron Reinhardt. You know, what was going on at this point was this entire art reform movement. Cameron Reinhardt saw that their industry was really hurting. Their market in Bisque dolls had been hurt by the French doll makers. They were trying to introduce new things to make them more palatable, and they thought maybe the cloth doll is the way we can go. So they tried to merge a little bit with Kathy Cruz and make her doll with ball-jointed legs. And guess what? Kathy Cruz said, I don't like this. This is not happening. That was the end of it, making that a very rare doll to find today. But you have several other really wonderful early Kathy Cruz dolls you're showing up there. One of them wearing the green sweater with the flowered skirt. She's carrying an original postcard from the Kathy Cruz company showing the doll in this costume, which is very nice to have. We have the sleeping baby and the Dumian baby and that wonderful tiny, tiny one. How many times have you ever seen that tiny Kathy Cruz baby? It is so very, very rare to find. There are, I think, in this collection, there are about 4 or 5 of the Kathy Cruz dolls that have with the early, what's so-called frog hand, where the fingers are all stitched together, and you can see that on the little Kathy Cruz with the green skirt, which is very, very rare to have. So these are wonderful examples of the Kathy Cruz dolls. The thing about this whole insurgent in Toyland concept is really important for us to see in the doll world, and to see, because we kind of close our eyes and we only think of the doll world. We don't think of the wider world of art, for example. But in actuality, the whole movement in the doll world was coming from a much larger thing. This was called, in the art world, it was called the secessionist movement. The secessionist movement. And this affected furniture, paintings, architecture, lifestyle, clothing fashion, all of it. People were breaking away from the way things had been done before, and they were starting all of their new wave type of movements. And when we think of the doll world, we always think about that wonderful exhibition that was done at the Teats department store in 1910, and we consider that the beginning of the art doll, or the art reform doll. That's where Cameron Reinhardt introduced their Bisque dolls with art character faces, which were phenomenally unsuccessful. Why is that? Because they were not insurgents. They were character dolls, but made the same way that dolls had been made. Bisque dolls, they were going to break. These new people in the art field wanted things different. And that's why cloth dolls became such a major, major piece for them. The entrance of women into the doll world was a big part of this movement as well. Kathy Cruz was so strong in her desire to make a doll that would have the feel of a child, that a child would want to hold, that would be realistic. And it was just a whole different feel once women came into it. And you saw the way that the American doll makers created their product as well. They were looking, that wonderful thing about the Beecher doll, they wanted to make it what that little girl wanted, a little soft doll that was fat in the stomach and little short arms and legs. I mean, this was different than the men that were creating these gorgeous and beautiful dolls, but not necessarily something that a child would relate to. The secessionist movement, insurgents in Toyland, that happened about 1900, and it went on for well over the next 2 decades. Use of new technology was an important part of it as well. Let's look at the example of another German doll maker that Nancy Smith focused on very heavily in her collecting, which also came apart at the same time as Kathy Cruz, and again was another one of the insurgents in Toyland.